You found the Backup Wrap-Up, your go-to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we break down how ransomware works by examining the 5 key objectives that attackers follow in nearly every campaign. My co-author, Dr. Mike Saylor, joins Prasanna and me to walk through the complete attack lifecycle, from gaining that initial foothold to delivering the dreaded ransomware note. We talk about initial access brokers, lateral movement, command and control or C2 communications, data exfiltration, and the encryption process itself. This is the first in what's going to be a long series discussing our new book, so buckle up. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about backup and recovery for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that there were no backups of the production database we just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Hi folks, wanted to mention my new book, Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, which is now available for pre-order at Amazon.com. I wrote it with my co-author, Dr. Mike Saylor, who's a blue team cyber defense expert. He really knows his stuff. There are dozens of books to tell you how not to get ransomware. Our book starts with the assumption you're probably going to get ransomware. So we tell you how to respond to it and how to recover from it. It's unlike anything else out there. We tell you what you need to do now to be able to respond when it happens. We covered defenses to reduce the blast radius, how to protect your backup system, incident response procedures, negotiation strategies, backup recovery techniques, and how to prevent it from happening again. The tech reviewers gave it overwhelmingly positive feedback, so I think it's going to be a big seller. Pre-order it now, search for Learning Ransomware Response and Recovery, or just look for my name, W. Curtis Preston. Hope you like it. Welcome to the Backup Wrap-Up. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, and I have 2 people with me today. We shall start with Prasanna Mana Maliandi. How's it going, Prasanna?
I'm good, Curtis. You have to, okay, really quickly, how was the show last night?
Oh, with Nimesh Patel?
Yes.
Nimesh was good. He's taping a special in April, so it was very
nice.
cool. I wasn't
Awesome.
quite in the front row. A lot of Indians in the crowd. And a lot of comments about that. I stood out a bit in the crowd, but it was very cool.
Awesome.
So welcome to the show, Prasanna.
Thank you, Curtis. It's good to be on the show.
Yeah, and of course, we have my book co-author. And look, Mike, it's right up here on the wall.
See it?
I can't. That is, by the way, that is really big. It's
good, actually.
Yeah, I think it's like good. 24 by 18 is what the size of it.
I was concerned that was actual size, but I'm glad you commented.
Yeah. So those are, I think, 13
Normal
by 17, right? The ones over there. Yeah. So by the way, for those of you, if you're listening, you can watch us on the tube by the same name, the Backup Wrap-Up. So this is Dr. Mike Saylor, my co-author. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you, guys.
And you're in your new office, apparently.
I am in a new office, yes.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about what you're doing over there?
Yeah. So I think when you and I started the book, I was involved to a lesser extent with some North Texas colleges and universities, helping them with their cybersecurity computer science programs. And then over the last couple of months, my engagement with Weatherford College in particular grew into, now I'm the department chair over business, computer science, and organizational leadership. So I can't get enough of more to do. So I'm at least succeeding in that.
I was going to say, Mike, that you just finished your PhD last year, right?
24.
I was like, Okay, 24. And I was like, okay, it looks like you got addicted to being in school or being around school. So you're like, okay, gonna go back, except this time I will help set up or run departments and all the rest. So
Well, over the last couple of years, I've thought about what does retirement look like, and I think I've got an idea of retiring as a in academia somewhere. Share my war stories and knowledge with the next generation. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
working towards.
Feel free to, I can think of a recommended textbook for your class.
It's a great idea.
Anyway, yeah. I remember at least one of my books. I remember finding out that it was a textbook somewhere, which I thought that was pretty cool, right? Being told that some people were being forced to buy my book. So, speaking of the book, we are beginning. This is at the very beginning of a very long series. We are going to be talking about this book literally for years.
what's the title?
Literally, we're going to do like 100 episodes about because there's so much to talk about in the book. But basically, we're going to just talk about the things that we learned. Some of which we already knew, but I think we learned some things along the way. And this one, Mike, I thought we would start with. We already did an episode or two. We did the "What is Ransomware" episode, and I also did because we were trying to book you. You're a busy man, and
It's my
we did
fault.
an,
It's my fault, not Mike's.
yeah, we did an episode on how disk helped but also hurt, right? Because the fact that the backups are on disk makes them an easier target from a ransomware perspective, right? And now we're going to talk about just sort of the attack process, the attack methodology, right? So the title here is 5 objectives of every ransomware attack. What are they going to try to do?
But
Do they almost all follow this same pattern?
To an extent, there are some that may deviate based on how the ransomware was designed, and so there are specific campaigns to do specific things. But in general, yeah, they do tend to follow the same process.
can I chime in on something?
Chime.
What's the name of this book that you are referring to?
Well, it's, of course, learning ransomware response and recovery. Although I appreciate the ability to plug Persona, there's already an ad that plays at the beginning of every episode. Trust me, I make sure they know the title of this book if they're listening to this episode. But yeah, and if you're watching it on YouTube, you get to see the picture right up behind me there. And Mike is, of course, my co-author. So let's talk about that. The first thing that they want to do, and let's define what an IAB is, right, and what this has to do with that first step, which is gaining that initial access to the environment.
And so that can take a lot of different forms too. I think we often hear about ransomware coming through an email that you clicked on something or you opened something. But speaking of IABs or initial access brokers, sometimes bad guys simply buy credentials from some other bad guy because that's that's the risk. That's their specialty. They just harvest credentials and they resell them. So now I don't need to rely on a user to interact with an email with malware in it. I have the credentials to log in and deploy my malware. So how it's initially deployed sometimes depends. So it depends on the threat actor. It depends on the campaign, and sometimes they may try both. Maybe I bought a bunch of credentials and none of them work. So now I'm going to start sending emails, or vice versa, right? I send a bunch of emails and nobody clicks on it. Well, now I need to go buy some credentials.
And is like if then I know you have a lot of expertise in this field. In your sort of experience, how successful is it sort of with the email versus, or how prevalent is the email attack side of things versus sort of the I buy credentials?
Well, email is the cheapest and statistically most reliable. And then there is a third option where bad guys do, they do an assessment of your environment looking for vulnerabilities. They find one they can exploit. Now they've got access that way without having to do either of the other two. But statistics with email has run pretty consistent over the last, almost a couple of decades. It's gotten a little bit better. Well, actually, there's a bit of an ebb and flow because traditional email phishing, we were getting better as users at detecting, bad grammar, bad punctuation. Like,
Right.
that just doesn't seem right. I'm not clicking on that. But now with AI, those emails are
Yeah.
written pristine. And if I can give
Right.
AI enough history of how you communicate, I can truly make that email sound like something you would say, right? Because that's the other giveaway with AI is that it's using language and things like Persona doesn't talk that way. He wouldn't sign his email like that. So now that's what I'm looking for instead of punctuation. I'm looking for, a sentence structure and the words you might use. Well, but AI, if I give it AI enough information, it can fool a lot of people. So there's been this, like, over, prior to AI being used as a tool, the statistical success of email phishing went down a couple of percentage points, but now with AI, it's going back up, and so it's usually around between 20 and 25%. So if I send out a
Okay.
million emails, that's 200,000 people are going to click on it, and
Really?
yeah,
That's really
Fascinating.
it
depressing,
is. Well,
Mike.
now, granted, you've got to consider all the other things too. Like maybe I have a good email filter, and so you
Hmm.
don't typically get emails from Persona, so that's going into quarantine, right? So there's other things that would impact that. So it does depend on how an environment might be set up to address phishing, but in general, between 20 and 25% delivery. All right, so that's just it made it to your inbox. Now, of the 20 to 25%, another 20 to 25% interact with the email. So out of 200,000, now you've got what 40,000 people actually opening the
Mm.
email. Of those, some another subset would actually, if it asked for credentials, they would give credentials. So out of a million emails, you're probably looking at, maybe 20, 30,000 actually
Wow.
actually interacting with it and potentially causing an infection or giving away their login credentials.
Wow.
And
And
of course
especially
when
given
you
how
well, of course when you're saying the word phishing, for those that because we're saying it out loud, this is phishing, ph, right? phishing, right? Um, and referring to this idea of sending something out. Essentially, you're phishing, right? You're sending a bunch of stuff out, hoping that you get a bite. And the thing is, like everything else, and we're going to say this a million times over these episodes, is they only have to be right once, right? They only have to get one person, right, to click on that email, and enter the credentials, and then boom, they're in the
And on
environment,
that
right?
note, it's funny that companies do these phishing exercises, and they're like, out of 100
Yeah,
people, only two people clicked, and that's great. I'm like, no, it's still two people. That's all they need. They just need one.
yeah,
It needs to be
yeah.
100%. But
All right, so we're trying to cover a lot in this half hour. So obviously, the first thing they got to do is to get in, right? To get some kind of either you talked a little bit about vulnerabilities. We've covered some of the vulnerabilities that happen, and then also, but I think would you agree that the most common way is essentially stolen credentials? Is that the most common way that people get into environments?
that is the most common successful path. Yes.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, and then obviously there are things like vulnerabilities that they can exploit. Those are just they're more work, I think, right? And many of those vulnerabilities require. I think this is hand in hand, right? So many of the vulnerabilities require that you're already in the environment, right? So if you have a vulnerability on your internal email server, but that internal email server isn't accessible via the internet, then you've got to be inside. Does that sound about right?
Well, I'm just going to go back to my favorite word or phrase. It depends. And so the initial
Damn it.
part of this, whether it's identifying a vulnerability on your perimeter, buying credentials, or phishing, almost all of that is automated because bad guys are lazy and they've figured out the secret way of doing a job. So that first phase is almost all automated. And a lot of times the
Right.
bad guy doesn't know that they compromised somebody until it phones home. And we'll get to that in a
Hmm.
minute. But things like, there was a recent 0 day with Fortinet firewalls. There was a 0 day with load balancers. There was a 0 day with some cloud services. All of those things. I mean, bad guys are keeping an eye on that stuff, and jumping on the opportunity to configure, scripted attacks to take advantage of those things. And so it's when those vulnerabilities get exploited and they get alerted that, hey, your script or your attack was successful. That's when they start applying actual effort. So
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about, so once they're in, right? So then what are they going to do at that point?
So the next part is understanding what they caught, right? So you got something on your line, and you're like, this is going to be a huge fish, and it turns out to be a little sunfish, or a minnow. And I say minnow because in some cases what you have is really just bait or a stepping stone for the next thing. But yeah, reconnaissance and understanding what you've gained access to is the next step, because maybe it's something they don't want to spend any more time on. Um, it's grandma's knitting shop. What's a value there, versus, well, I don't have time to mess with that. I'd rather spend the 10 hours that I've got to look at the next thing that just told me got compromised. So I'm going to go see what that is. And so it's a little bit about,
And
you just have to be less valuable or more protected than your neighbor. Um, so
It's that thing about
yeah,
not outrunning the
yeah,
bear,
you just have
right?
to be
Don't have to
faster than
outrun
the
the
other
bear, just
guy.
have to outrun the other guy.
Yeah,
and Mike, are the people who do this sort of second level analysis, is that the same person who did the initial access broker and got in initially, or is this sort of they got in and now they just hand things over? Because I've heard that there are like multiple personas sometimes involved in a ransomware
for
attack.
sure.
So
Yeah, there's different threat actors. Initial access brokers, that's just their job. So they are either collecting or buying and reselling credentials. Because sometimes, maybe they'll go buy, a million credentials, and then they'll validate them and then sell them as validated credentials, which can bring more money versus just saying I've got a lot of credentials and selling them because I don't know if they're valid or not. So initial access brokers, that's a job. That's a bad guy's career. That's all they do. And so sometimes there is continued interaction. So maybe I sold you some credentials for this target, and one or two of them work, but maybe some of them don't. So I may come back to you and say, hey, what else do you have related to this company? What else can you find? Go back out to your network and see if you can buy or get updated credentials, however you got them the first time.
And then the lateral movement and the recon, that still can be automated, right? Like once something gets installed, it can sort of poke
It
around and
often is.
figure out what's
It
out there.
certainly often is. The malware is designed to go and look for specific things. Like it'll say, look for all the Microsoft Office related, document, spreadsheet, PowerPoint, and then give me a count and a file size for all of those things. Because if they're all like,
Hmm. Hmm.
10 or 15K, probably not interested in those. But if you've got a 2 or 3 meg spreadsheet, probably interested in that. And maybe even the
Right.
file name, financial forecast for 2026. I probably want that. Or uh, uh,
Password.txt.
absolutely, or cybersecurity insurance program details.
Oh,
Right.
right.
So I
Yes.
want that. Well,
Yes.
then maybe there's
Cyberinsurance.pdf.
photos or backup files. Your Veeam backup file types. Your accounting system file types. So it's going to be pre-programmed to go look for this stuff, inventory it, and then give that back to me so I can determine the value of what I have access to. But it's also going to look for what other things does this device have access to? Am I
Right.
mapped to a network drive? Do I have credentials to a cloud environment? Is there I'm trying to remember the Microsoft service that maintains your credentials across different
Oh,
apps.
you mean like Intra ID, Active Directory?
Entra, but then there's actually a
Yeah.
service that runs on a Windows machine that manages that. So it's going to look for that too, like what services are running.
Right.
So yeah, that kind of stuff is automated. That's what happened to Target, and there's other malware too. Like back in the day when the target was mostly credit card numbers, the malware would be scripted to identify point of sale systems. And so it could get in through
Mm.
the HVAC system, and it will automatically crawl through the network until it finds and it interrogates each device it gets access to. Are you a POS? No. Then it'll move on and sometimes even clean up after itself until it finds the target. SCADA, what happened to the Iran centrifuge? It's very similar. That malware looked for what is a centrifuge, and it would only detonate when it found what it was scripted to look for.
And Mike, as it's doing the searches, is it hopping from device to device and doing searches, kind of like spreading like a worm, or is it just using that initial access point
No, it
device
wants to
to sort of
it
search
wants to
everything
spread because the other objective of malware is persistence. So, I've seen this in practice because we often get asked to compromise or test the security of an environment. One of the ways we do that is custom malware. And so when we infect one machine, we want that machine to help us infect other machines. And antivirus, especially with custom malware, it usually takes antivirus a week to determine that that's malware. Well, then it updates the software, the signatures on this computer, and then our malware gets scraped. Well, it's going to do that sequentially, and that gives us time then to tweak our malware and redeploy it on those threads that are still open. No, absolutely, it wants to spread and maintain some level of persistence.
All right. So we got in. We're spreading around, and then what's next?
So when it has that inventory or a good understanding or it's achieved whatever it was designed to do, it's going to
Right.
phone home. It's going to go, hey, bad guys, here's what you've got. Let me know what's next. And that then leaves it up to the bad guy to determine, all right, well, and I say that some malware is just scripted to detonate on everything whenever it gets access to it. So it doesn't care. It doesn't care if your grandma's yarn shop or an oil and gas company. The moment you get infected, it just starts encrypting stuff. So there's that, and so that goes back to it depends. But in most sophisticated attacks, it's going to phone home and give them an idea of what they've got access to, so that the bad guys can then determine. Because maybe I don't want to detonate the ransomware. Maybe I want to maintain some access and start doing more recon and eavesdrop.
Yeah, maybe you don't quite have the golden goose that you're looking for, but maybe you can do a more manual lateral movement and recon, right? Something that's controlled by a human rather than a bot.
So we would
right?
consider that more of an advanced persistence. So it's not an automated persistence. It's a human driven persistence where they're going to pivot and listen and maybe modify.
Yeah, the term advanced persistent threat, right?
I didn't want to call it an APT because a lot of times those are nation state driven, but I like the advanced persistence part of that.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, so it's going to phone home, and then it's going to wait to determine if bad guys want to do anything else or modify the attack.
So when you say phone home, could you provide a little bit more details? Because it's not like it's going to like pick up the phone or just be like, hey, I'm just going to ping this IP or send a message, right? Or an SMS, right? What do you mean by phone home?
So ahead of a campaign, bad guys will typically rent servers out on the darknet. So the compromised machines, a virtual machine, they don't care if it gets blown away or compromised in the future. And they'll hold that lease for a period of time, usually a couple of days, a week, sometimes only a few hours. And then they will pre-configure the malware with the IP address or the host name of that, what we would consider a command and control server. It's what the bad guys are commanding and controlling their attack from. So they deploy the malware. When it calls home, it knows to call back to that command and control server, and that's where that information is going to come from. That's also where if ransomware is part of the attack, that's how they're going to negotiate the keys, the encryption keys, the public-private keys. back in the day, that's also why your ransom note said you have 72 hours to reply to this. Well, it's because they were only going to lease that server for 72 hours. And at the end of 72 hours, when it gets blown
Ah,
away, well, so do your encryption keys. So
oh
yeah,
man.
so that's evolved a bit today. Uh, some ransomware don't do the negotiation; it's just hard coded with how it's going to encrypt, and that's one of the ways that um, law enforcement's helping victims combat ransomware is because if the FBI helped company A and it was ransomware strain A, and then you get infected with the same ransomware strain, they may be able to use a decryption key from some other victim to help you with yours.
Mm.
So again, it depends. It depends on how the ransomware was built and that encryption was designed. But that
So,
phoning home goes back to that command and control server.
so in this episode, we're covering what I'm going to call a traditional ransomware attack, but I'm going to add what has become more traditional because it wasn't covered in the initial 5 steps that we were talking about. And I'm going to talk a little bit about exfiltration, or I want you to talk a little bit about exfiltration, right? Because I think, what do you think? Do you have any stats that talk about the percentage of ransomware attacks that have become double extortion
It's
attacks, where they're stealing the
it's
data?
definitely increasing, especially with those that are not just automated attacks. And what I mean, and so there's this development of kind of two generic. I'm gonna classify those two generic ransomware types of attacks. There's the low end attacks, and within those low end attacks, you have a variety of threat actors. Some of them are just entrepreneurs. And what I mean by that is bad guys are developing ransomware as a service. So there's ransomware, they have the email list, maybe they have access or credentials. But you, as the entrepreneur, don't have to be technical at all. You just go to the dark net, you pay them $30,000, and they will launch a ransomware campaign on your behalf and deposit money for you. They'll take some off the top. There's good tech support and customer service, all those things. Well, so
Crazy.
that's low. That's on the generic low end attack because the ransomware as a service provider and you as an entrepreneur, you don't care to go and access the environment and poke around and see what else they have. You just want to return on your investment and you want to play the statistics. All right, so there's that.
Mhm.
The other kind of generic low end attack is true bad guys, but they've just simply automated the ransomware and they have zero empathy for you. I mean, they could ransomware and completely encrypt a kid's hospital for all they care. They just want to automate.
And they have,
They have
right? They
now
have, yeah.
in most of those cases they did feel bad and they unencrypted it, and I think mostly because other bad guys threatened them. It's kind of like the
Mm,
child predators going to prison and the other prisoners taken out
right.
anyway. So those threat actors don't really care what they have. They're just again playing the numbers that out of 100 people they encrypt, some subset of that is going to pay some amount of money in ransom, and that's how they make their money. And so they're kind of the bottom feeders as far as ransomware goes. Well, then you get into the other group, and that's the more sophisticated ransomware gangs, and those are the ones that really care about what they're getting access to, and they realize that most of victims today are using backups or they don't have the money to pay any amount of ransom, and they're just going to go with accept what they've lost and go buy another computer. So these guys realize that fewer people are paying ransom, and if a ransom is paid, that actually increases the risk to them because now they're on the FBI list, and Interpol's looking for them, or whatever the case may be. And bad guys are lazy, but they're also risk averse. That's why they're doing all this stuff over the internet. So what they are doing is increasing their tactics at exfiltrating your data so that if you don't pay the ransom, they can use those pictures or those files or that data as a second attempt at getting you to pay something um, in the event that you weren't going to pay the ransom.
And,
Right. And so,
and
go ahead, Persona.
and sort of Mike, that last category that you talked about, um, is there a certain type of victim that they target, like large organizations or select types of people like celebrities, or is it kind of more the spray and pray and then figure it out by looking at each one?
So The double extortion really only starts. Well, backing up to answer your question, it's still a variety of attack strategies. So there's the spray and pray, and then there's the recon, and then the call home, and then they go, "Hey, this company is worth double extorting," and they will do it.
Mm.
So any company that's of value to a threat actor in that second category, that more advanced category, any victim that's worth continuing their attack, they will exfiltrate data from. So that could be a credit union, it could be a school. In general terms, back to your question about what type of targets, if they are going to target somebody specific, they will likely target somebody that's regulated, like healthcare or financial
Mm.
institution, or a school district, or
Where they've got real penalties
right.
if
Yep.
data, like personal data, gets
Yep.
out.
And so maybe the school or the hospital doesn't want to pay the ransom. All right, so now they're getting double extorted, and they still don't want to pay. Well, now threat actors are getting pretty good at figuring out who they report to, so they'll reach out to their board or the regulator, like the Health and Human Services auditor, or the state, or their insurance carrier, and say, "Hey, your client's not wanting to pay, but this could be bad for them, and they do have insurance, and so why don't we negotiate?" And so on the good guy side, there's actually a full-time job of ransomware negotiating. And I got to sit with one of those guys once. That was pretty eye-opening.
So, the title of this episode was like five, the five objectives, and I'm going to say five objectives of every ransomware. I'm not sure every ransomware does exfiltration, but we'll add that as sort of a 5.5, right? Like you said, it's like an advanced way to do that. But let's say that, and they are going to do, if they're going to do exfiltration, they're going to do that before they do the next step, which is the big payload, which is what?
Oh, the encryption. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is what I'm going to call old school ransomware, right? Um, and this is obviously that is the whole point of a ransomware attack, or at least the initial whole point of a ransomware attack. Is this is how they hold, because they're not literally stealing your data, right? They're going to encrypt the data so that it's like it was stolen. It's like they took it away from you and they're holding a gun to its head.
Yep. And along those lines too, not to get too far ahead, when your data is encrypted and you're talking to bad guys, which I don't recommend, you should have good backup so you don't ever have to talk to bad guys.
Yeah, no argument here.
But
No
when you
argument here.
do, and the bad guys are like, "Pay us money, and we'll help you decrypt your data," the first thing you need to do is similar to a real life ransom, is you want proof of life. So you will send
Right.
them examples of all these different types of files you have from all the different devices you have, so that they can prove that they can decrypt those before you pay them.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask that question. I was like, why wouldn't they just encrypt your data and without ever knowing a key and have people pay the ransomware? Like, there's no guarantee
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to be honest.
Yep. And they're bad guys, so they don't have to be, but they are also in a business, so they want to be. So that, especially when you're working with an insurance company, if they know that you're a threat actor that doesn't care, then they're not going to negotiate with you. But if you do,
Yeah, because people that do this on a regular basis, like yourself, like you get to know certain groups, right? You get to know certain threat actors and how they behave. And are there groups where they've established this as a practice where they just don't care, and so
yep,
you might behave differently
they
with them?
are. So a lot of the Eastern European, Middle Eastern, and Northern African threat actors, they don't care. They're just playing the numbers, and they don't.
That's an entire region of the
It
world that you
is.
just
It
named,
is.
Mike.
And going back to those two buckets, the low end bucket with the entrepreneurs, almost all of those are in the
Mhm.
U.S.
Mm.
Interesting.
They caught one. They caught a few
America.
years ago in Florida, and this goes back to there's you need to watch enough bad guy video movies to know how to behave as a bad guy, and this guy didn't. So as soon as he started making money, he bought a big house and flashy cars.
Um,
That's what
Dude,
tipped him off. So yeah.
Mike, so those three regions that you previously mentioned, do you have any stats around what percentage of ransomware attacks come from those
I
areas?
don't, but it wouldn't be hard to find. In fact, the UN does an annual report on cyber, and that's probably a good place to look.
Okay, maybe Curtis, we can link it in the
Yeah,
podcast
yeah.
episode.
And of course, the final step of the 5 steps, not including the fifth and a half step, is delivering the ransomware note. And how does this, is this still the old school of like it just shows up on a screen?
Not usually. Back in the day, it would come up as a banner, or they would change the background of your desktop so that that's it's on every screen that you've got. Today, because that is viewed as kind of um, elementary by more sophisticated hackers. That's kind of a newbie thing. Like, look what I did. So most ransomware today will put a text file in every folder that it encrypted something in. So there'll be a
Oh,
text file on your
yeah.
desktop. There'll be a text file in my documents. There'll be a text file everywhere, and it's the same text file, but that is, and it'll say ransomware note dot whatever, and in that,
Read
yeah.
me. Read me on my
Yeah.
ransomware note.
Mike, I had a question. So you said that it'll go encrypt data, but of course it can't encrypt operating system files, otherwise the system would
And they don't
crash.
want the system to crash. They want you to be able to open
So
it up and see the ransom note
yeah.
and see your encrypted data.
So so then does it ignore certain extension types and certain directories? So potentially could I put all my personal documents in the Windows subfolder and be safe, or are they smarter than that?
Some of them are pretty smart, and they don't even care what the file is called because they will look at the file header
The header?
to determine what. So you could call your spreadsheet a DLL file. You could rename it.
Yeah.
I'm going to trick them, right? So it could be passwords.dll and put it in your Windows directory. The ransomware is going to scan those files not based on their file name and extension, but file header flags. So the file header flag is what the operating Windows, particularly, whenever you click on a file, it doesn't always care what the extension is, as long as the file header flag tells the operating system what application to use to open that file.
Mhm.
And if it still says I need to open this in a spreadsheet, then the malware will find it. But back to your point, yeah, it excludes system
Yeah.
operating system files.
Because like you said, it wants the system to be alive so you can find those files and realize your system's
One of the
been
one of the one
ransomware.
of the quick ways to respond to ransomware several years ago was that there was a particular ransomware. So one of the things that I ask, if when someone calls and says I think I have ransomware, it's like, can you tell me anything about what it might be? So tell me what the ransomware note says. Tell me what the extension is. And there is a ransomware type that does not look in your trash can. So I'm like, delete everything you care about. Highlight it, hit delete. And as long as it's in your trash can, it's safe from ransomware.
Interesting. Interesting. So one question I forgot to ask during the encryption phase, when I think about encryption, like I think that seems like it would be a very resource intensive process that might take a while. But what I'm hearing repeatedly is that they're actually able to encrypt data pretty quickly. Is that correct?
It is, but not without notice. So if you're paying any attention at all to your computer while you're using it, the mouse
Mm-hmm.
hesitates. You're typing, but nothing is, you've typed the word, but it hasn't shown up on the screen yet. Um, your email isn't coming in. Your network is slow. Things like that are good indications that something else is going on. So even though they've gotten better as far as the encryption algorithms, it's still math, and math takes a lot of processing and memory. And so if you're paying attention at all, you should be able to determine that something weird's happening. And that's any relatively recent uh, antivirus, anti-malware solution that you can put on your computer will help you figure that out too.
So you basically want to have all your files on deathly slow spinning media as far away from possible with a network throttle put on it.
I don't think that's a valid recommendation there, Prasan. All right. Well, we wanted this to be a quick, overview of the 5 steps, right? Let's just review them. We want the ransomware wants to get installed undetected, wants to move laterally around, do some recon, figure out what it's dealing with. It's going to phone home, let the bad guys know what's going on, encrypt everything. Somewhere between those last 2 steps, they will probably possibly be looking at some exfiltration. And then once it's done the encryption, it's going to deliver the ransomware note, and then everything happens from that point on. So we got a lot to cover, and I just want to thank you for coming on the pod.
Hey, anytime. And I think some add-on thoughts for future discussion is, when a bad guy exfils your data and you decide not to pay for them not to release your data, they've got things like they've got a wall of shame, so that everybody knows you were compromised. They are then willing to sell. They become an access broker, right? So now they're selling access to your environment to somebody else. And so there's some pretty solid statistics that if you get hit once, you're going to get hit again.
Yeah, yeah. These are the depressing things.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Prasanna.
No, this is good. I'm excited for the 100 episodes.
Yeah, it's only going to take us 2 years. All right. That is a wrap.